the operating system, especially when you're working or doing dual booting. But that's a little high level for you guys. I just wanted to give you guys a overview of what this folder is for, and just a little bit more of an idea of what's located in this directory is the boot files as well as grub most of the time, which is a small program that allows you to select the operating system and boot the operating system. Now the next directory is CD-ROM, and that's obviously where your CD drive is stored. So anytime you put a disk into your Linux operating system, it'll show up under CD-ROM. Now the next directory I want to really talk about is the dev directory. That's the next directory down, and this is where all your physical devices are mounted. So all your hard drives, USB, optical drives. And the reason I say optical drives, CD drives, because they can be mounted under this location or stored under this location as well. It just all depends on the different distributions. Different distributions store things in different places. Sometimes they have a extra directory here and there. That's why I didn't talk much about the CD-ROM folder, which is obviously that's what that's for, the CD drive. But typically that's stored, and depending on the distribution, the CD-ROM drives are stored under dev as well. But all your hard drives are stored in this location. They're actually mounted from that location. And also, if you have like multiple partitions on a single drive, those will be stored under this location as well. And you'll see that once you start really diving in how to partition a hard drive for your Linux operating system. Now, the next directory I want to explain to you guys is the etc directory. And it basically stands for etc. But this is where all the configuration files are stored. And this is for all the applications that are installed on the Linux operating system. So let's say you want to install an Apache server. Well, they'll have configuration files stored under the etc directory. Or if you want to set up MySQL, or if you're trying to modify your SSH connections or your configuration for your SSH server, then the configuration file is underneath there. And most of your configuration files have an extension of conf, so CONF. Okay, and so the next directory is basically the home directory. And I kind of explained this when I was showing you guys how to navigate the Linux file system by using the cd command. Well, the home directory is where all the username folders are stored. So anytime a new user is created on the system, depending on if that option is selected or not, a home folder is actually created. And this is where all your documents and photos and video files, they're all stored under that user's home directory, which is stored under this home folder. Now, the next folder is the lib directory. And this is where binaries are kept. And a lot of times you'll notice that many times when installing Linux packages, additional libraries are automatically downloaded. And they almost always end up in the lib directory somewhere. And just to simply put it, these files or files that are needed for your program to work on Linux. And just to relate it to Windows, you can think of this folder is somewhat an equivalent of the program files folder on Windows. But keep in mind, it's not 100% exactly the same. And just to explain these other folders that are in there that says lib32 is basically if you have a 32-bit piece of software, this is where the libraries are stored for that, as well as system 64-bit software. That is where those libraries files are stored as well. And then there's a libx32, and this contains library files as well. Now the media directory, which is the next directory, I'm going to skip over that lost and found. That's just a typical folder that's in AEXT4 partition. But the media directory is basically another place where external devices such as USB drives, whenever you plug them in, they'll pop up in there, or you can mount them in there. And it all depends on the Linux distribution. Sometimes you may not even see that media directory. You'll see a mount directory, which is the next one I wanted to show you guys. And this is basically a placeholder folder used for mounting folders or drives. And this is where I typically mount external drives or remote drives to my operating system. And like I stated, it's simply a placeholder. And a lot of times I'll create multiple folders underneath that depending on where I'm connecting to. Let's say I'm connecting to a shared drive, or I want to mount a shared drive on another server that's within my network, and I want it to always mount to that location. I'll create a folder for it and I'll name it like the server name or something, or the share name, and then I'll set it up where that shared drive is mounted at that location every single time the system boots up. Now the next folder is the opt directory, and this is for optional software for the system, and that's the simplest way to put it. And I never have used the opt directory for anything, but it all depends on the distribution you're using as well. Now the proc directory is an important directory as well. This is the processes folder where a lot of systems information is represented as files. And it basically provides a way for the Linux kernel to send and receive information from various processes running in the Linux environment. Now the next directory is the root directory, and this is different from the actual root location. This is basically the home directory for the root account. You know, like we have the home folder and then Josh, where there is a built-in user called root that has full permissions to pretty much everything on the system. With Ubuntu, they have this account disabled by default, but it has its own home directory. So if you ever logged into that root account, which I don't recommend, this is where the files are stored for the root directory. So if you download something, it'll default to the root directory while you're running as the root user. Now the next directory is the run directory, and this is where a lot of drives are auto mounted when you like plug in a USB drive, and this is something that's really only relevant to desktop environments. So if you have a desktop environment installed, a lot of times they'll have the run directory under your root, where a lot of those drives that are like auto mounted to the system, they'll pop up under run, and you can unmount them from that location. And let's say you want to mount them under the mount directory or the MNT directory, then you can easily do that. But they put that there for newer modern Linux distributions so that when you plug in a USB drive, it'll automatically mount at that location. I don't normally use it, but it is there for a lot of users that are transitioning from different operating systems, just to make it more user friendly. Now the next directory is sbin, and it's similar to the bin directory, except that it's dedicated to certain commands that can only be run by the root user or super user. And this directory kind of depends on the distribution as well. Now the temp directory, this is basically where files are temporarily stored, and most of the time when you shut down the system, it'll delete those files from that directory. And I actually missed one of the directories, and that's snap. Snap is a new way of actually installing applications by somewhat containerizing the application using, they call it snap packages, and you'll see that a lot in Ubuntu systems. But this is where that is stored. Now the US/OR directory, it basically contains files and utilities that are shared between users. That's why I call it, I just said the US/OR, but I typically call it the user directory. That's simply what that is. It's just utilities that are shared between users. And then the var directory is basically where variable data is kept, and it's usually system logs, but can also include other types of data as well. Like for instance, if you're running this thing as a server, then the default location for Apache is var, and then there's a folder underneath that called www and then HTML. So that's where that's actually stored as far as files. And then they also have log files within there. Like if you're running a server and you have an Apache server set up, then you typically will see your log files under var, and there's a directory called log. And then also under the root directory, you'll see a swap file, depending on if you have swap on the system. And typically if you install it without making any changes or modifying the way the system is set up, you just take the defaults when you're going through the installation, then you'll typically have a swap file. And this is just an extra place to store things that are stored in memory that haven't been accessed for a while. So let's say you have a browser open, but then you go over and start working on something else, and you eventually get to the point where it needs to store, your system needs to store some information that you have open that you're not currently using. Well, sometimes it'll write it to the swap file. So that's essentially what that is. But that's pretty much the Linux file structure. I just wanted to cover it this way just to make it super simple, where I just talked about each one of the directories and you can see them on the system as I go through them. So let's go down and move on to the next section. In this next segment, I want to cover some systems information commands that you can run within the Linux terminal. Now, when you have a desktop environment, there are GUI tools that can provide most of the information that I'm going to show you within the command line, but it's a good idea to at least understand how to get this information from the command line. And just to show you the GUI version of kind of what I'm going to show you from the command line, I just wanted to open it up right fast. You can basically go hit the activities and then you can search in here for a system. And you should bring up the system monitor. And like I said, this will give you a lot of information. So this is the system processes that are running on the system. And this is similar to opening up the computer management on Windows systems. But you can see your resource information as well, file system information as well. So hard drives and all that good stuff. Now I'm going to show you how to look at all this information from the command line, because all this information is pulled from some of the folders that I actually showed you within the Linux file system. And it's just put in a graphical user interface so you guys can see it a little bit better. But you can easily do the exact same thing from the command line, which I will go down and show you now. So let's go down and close this and open up the terminal. And let's zoom in again. And sorry, I closed it, but I need to show you guys the GUI version of the commands I'm about to show you. Now let's start off with a couple basic commands. Like for instance, I want to show you guys uptime. So we could type man uptime just to show it to you, but it basically tells you how long the system has been running. So let's quit that and let's run uptime and press enter, and that's basically the information that it gives you. It gives you the time that the system has been up, as well as the amount of users and the load average of the CPU, which is some of the information that's pulled into that system monitor. Now the next command I wanted to show you guys is the free command, and this deals with memory. So we could type man and then free and press enter. And as you can see, it says displays amount of free and used memory in the system. So we can press Q for quit and run free. All I'm gonna do is just run the basic command, but it gives you this information for the memory usage on your system. And like I said, I just kind of wanted to show you guys a high overview or the base level of what the command is used for, because a lot of these commands are used by systems administrators, because when you're running a server, you don't have a graphical interface. You have to do everything from the command line. And I don't want to make this course too advanced. I just want to touch on some of these commands because it will definitely help you when you start going for Linux certifications. Now, the next command I wanted to show you guys is the PS command. And this command will display Linux processes that are currently going on. It's simply a snapshot. So it won't refresh. It'll just pull in what's currently happening at the moment on the Linux operating system as far as processes that are running on the system. So the first thing, let me open up the man page for the PS command just so you can see that it does have a man page as well as some detailed description on how to use it. But the basic way I typically run it is PS and then -A. This is the only way I think you should actually run it. And like I said, this is just a snapshot of all the processes. So let's say you need to kill a process, because occasionally that happens. You need to go in and kill a process. Well, this is the process ID right here. that number that shows the process ID. So you can actually kill a process if you need to via the command line. I won't show you guys how to do that, but that's something you may have to do in the future once you get a little bit more familiar with using the operating system. Now let's get into some hard drive or hard disk commands that I wanted to show you guys from the command line. And I don't know if you remember, but within that system monitor application, you'll see that it showed some of the disk information and partitions and all that stuff. Well, let me show you how to find that information from the command line if you need it. And the first command I wanted to show you guys was the df command. So let's type man df. And basically this reports file systems disk space usage. So let's go down and quit the man page and run the command. And we could just run it. It has a number of options, but I'll just run it just to show you guys how to actually use it. But as you can see, it pulls in a lot of information based on the disk space. Like for instance, this is the partition that housed the root directory, and you can tell by it being mounted, or the mount location, but it's mounted at root. So that pretty much holds the operating system right there. And just to make the information look a little bit better so you can understand it, because it's kind of hard to read this stuff in bytes. Well, there is an option just like I showed you on other commands, but it's -H for human readable, and that'll basically give you the sizes in a readable format. And as you can see, that breaks it out right there. So as you can see, the full size is 30 gigabytes and the operating system is taking up about 9 gigabytes, and you have 21 gigabytes available, and so 31% is actually taken up. But this is a lot of great information you can get about hard drives and hard disks and partitions that are connected to your Linux operating system. Now let's clear right fast because I want to show you guys another command, and it's called fdisk. So let's type man fdisk and press enter. And as you can see, you can manipulate disk partition tables. Now this is a great command, but just to pull information about your partitions, you want to run the -L option, which is represented right here. So that's the way we're going to run it. That's typically how I pull information that I'm trying to see about partitions on the system. So fdisk -L and press enter. And it may not work because you need permissions, and this is where the sudo command actually comes in on. And I'll still cover that sudo command in the next segment, but I'll just run it so you guys can kind of see. But I really want to explain what sudo is actually used for and the purpose of the actual program. But sudo and then fdisk -L and press enter, and it should ask us for our user account password, or our sudo password, so to speak. And this gives you a little bit more information about all the partitions on the system. And as you can see right here, this is our main hard drive again, a VDA 32 gig, and it breaks out all the different partitions as well as the partition types and the sizes and all that good information about the disk. Now let me clear it because I want to show you one more command that I think is beneficial for you guys to actually learn or check out. But let's type man, and then there's another one called ls block, and let's press enter. And as you can see, it lists block devices. So let's press Q and actually run the command. So let's go ls block and see the results that actually comes up. And as you can see, it gives you a little bit more information, but as you can see, it breaks it down a little further. It shows you the boot locations of pretty much everything, or the mount points, which it did using the other command. But this is just another command that can help you while you're trying to check on disks that are connected to the system. And I know you guys are probably wondering, what are these loopbacks? Just ignore them. You don't have to worry about it. A lot of times that's just special block devices that are mapped to like normal files, and it shows up as a virtual block device. That's essentially what that is. Now let me go down and clear again. But now let's put all this information together. I showed you guys how to look at the processes that are running on the Linux operating system, as well as the CPU load, the uptime, and the memory information. Well, there are some built-in utilities that you can use to look at all this information just like you would in the GUI version, but it's for the command line. So the first one I wanted to show you guys is top. So if we run man top, this will just give you some information about it, but it basically says displays Linux processes, but it displays more information than what you think. So let's go down and hit Q and just run top so you guys can see it. And as you can see, it will update just like the processes were updating in the GUI, but this is all on the command line. It's a little bit difficult to understand if you don't know what you're looking for. So that's why I wanted to throw in the other one. And the way you get out of it, you just hit Q and that'll drop you back down to the terminal. But let's clear again and let's run man htop. And I'm 100% sure this application is stored on here, and it might not have a manual, but I'm sure this application is on here. But so let's go on and install it right fast, because I want you guys to actually see it, because there are some utilities that have gotten a facelift. And as you can see, htop, it has the same word in it as top. You know what I'm saying? It just has a facelift, so it'll look a little better within the command line, and you can get a little bit more information, and it runs pretty much the same as top. Okay, cool. So it's installed. Let's run htop. And as you can see, it gives a better representation of what you're actually looking for. And I recommend you install htop if you don't have it installed on your system. Most systems come with htop installed by default. I'm not sure why Ubuntu decided to remove that, but htop is a very valuable utility that's beneficial when trying to troubleshoot applications. So as you can see, you can get out of it using F10 or Q, and that'll exit out of htop. So that concludes this segment, showing you guys how to get some systems information from the command line. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Now, the next command I wanted to show you guys was dealing with networking. Now, if you have a desktop environment, there probably is a network manager in the GUI, and I'll just go there so you can see it. But under wired connections, you can go to wired settings, and this will bring up the network connections, which is under settings, and you can go through and modify your settings as far as like setting a static IP address or changing up your DNS servers, you know, all that good stuff. You can do it right here within the GUI. But I also just wanted to show you how to gather that information from the command line by showing you two specific commands. The first one is an older command that's been around for a very long time, but it's called ifconfig, similar to ipconfig on a Windows operating system. So ifconfig, let me just go to the man page, and it looks like it isn't a man page, and they might have removed this command from the system, because I know it's becoming the oldest version, or it's like an older version to look at the IP addresses associated with the system. Yeah, and as you can see, it's not on the system by default. So let's go on and install that as well. So let's go sudo apt install, and you can easily install these packages. That way you can use some of these tools that I'm going through. You can follow this. I'm just writing sudo apt install and then the net tools. And I know I haven't covered the software management piece, but I'll get into that in a little bit. I just wanted to show you guys these commands that should be on the system by default. It all depends on the distribution that you're using, because you could probably install a Debian operating system and it may or may not have this tool on it. But I still wanted to show it to you guys because it's still relevant. It's something that a lot of people still use. But I'll show you the newest version of this command in a couple seconds next. Now let's clear the screen and run ifconfig and press, or actually let's go to the manual, because it should have a manual now. So ifconfig, press enter. That'll open it up, and basically what it says is configure a network interface. So most people use it just like ipconfig, just to get the get the IP information on your system. So if config, press enter. As you can see, it pulls up the network device, which that is the name of the network device on this system. Yours may have a different name, but it's essentially the exact same thing. And as you can see, this is my IP address as well as the IP version 6 address there as well, and other basic networking information. Now, I won't cover all of this, but I just wanted to at least show you how to gather that information. Now, the newest version of this command is actually IP, and this should be installed by default now. Man IP, yes, and it is. It says shows, manipulate, routing, network devices, interfaces, and tunnels. And this is a way more detailed command. There's a lot of options that go along with this command, and hence this is why it's replacing ifconfig. So let's press Q to quit to get out of it, and let's clear and just run IP and press enter, and that should show you the help. But I wanted to go, let's IPA. That'll pull all the IP information. As you can see, it pulls up basically the same information. This is the device name right here, as well as all the IP addresses underneath it. So IP version 4 and IP version 6, as well as your other device information on this system. And once you learn this command, you can make changes to it. You can set an IP address, a static IP address, or you can add more connections to it and force your system to pull another IP address. And you can change how you route traffic, but a lot of that goes into the systems admin type of roles. But I at least wanted to cover the command so you guys can see how to actually gather this information if you need to. So within this segment, we're going to cover the sudo command, as well as the software center and the apt package manager, which is what you'll use to manage software. Now, before we get to the package manager as well as the software center, I wanted to talk about the sudo command, just so you guys can get a clear understanding of what it actually is. And just to simply break it down for you, sudo stands for super user do, and is used to access restricted files and operations, because by default the Linux operating system restricts access to certain ports of the system, preventing sensitive files from being compromised. And what happens when you run the sudo command, it temporarily elevates privileges, allowing users to complete sensitive tasks without logging in as the root user. So first thing I want to do is run man and sudo. That way you can get a little bit more information about it. And like I said, I always run these man commands so you guys can see where to get the information for each one of these commands. So let's press enter, sudo, and it says execute a command as another user, and typically is used to elevate a user to a super user status or as the root user of the system. And the simplest way to relate it to a Windows operating system, when you want to run something as an administrator, you right click on the application and hit run as administrator. Now, it doesn't ask you for a password, in Windows, but you do have to take that extra step to run things as the administrator. It'll just simply pop up with a prompt asking you if you want to run this application as an administrator. But in Linux, it's totally different. You have to type in your password anytime you want to elevate your privileges. So let's go on and quit. And the way I'm going to show you guys is what I typically use the sudo command for, and that is updating your system. Now, there are multiple ways of updating it. I believe in earlier parts of the course, I covered how to install packages within the software center, which I'll bring it up after this, just to show you that it's actually using sudo while using the software center as well. But I wanted to cover in the command line how to update the system. But before I do that, let's run the man command against apt as well, because most applications do have a manual, and this is the case for the app package manager. And as you can see, it says command line interface, and what it's used for is to install and update packages. Now let's go on and quit that. I just wanted to kind of show it to you. But apt actually stands for Advanced Package Management Tool. And basically, it facilitates the process of installing and uninstalling Linux software packages. An apt is typically the package manager for Debian-based distributions. So majority of Debian-based distributions will have the apt package manager installed and ready for you to use to install packages on the system. And depending on what distribution you are using, there are other package managers out there. But like I stated, I want to focus on apt. So now let's use the sudo command and apt command to update our system. Now the first command I'm going to run is sudo apt update. And just to break this command down, first we're using sudo to elevate our privileges because we can only make changes to the operating system files if we elevate our privileges, because a lot of the packages, where the binaries are and all that stuff, is in an area that's owned by the root user of the operating system. And in order for us to make changes to it, we have to elevate our privileges so that we're running the command as root. So that's just simply what the sudo command is for. And then we have apt, which is our package manager. And then there's an option called update. And what update will do, just to break it totally down, most Linux distributions have repositories where they store authorized software that you can install in the system. And the update command basically updates the cache of the available packages to your operating system. And this is something that you want to do because it'll let you know if you have updates. So if a new package is on their repository that's installed on your system, then it'll let you know after running the update command. So let's go on and run it now so you guys can kind of see what it's going to do. And anytime you run sudo, you have to type in your password for your user account unless it's timed out, because I believe it's a time period of 5 minutes or so. Once you authenticate once, if you run the sudo apt updated command again within that 5-minute time period, it won't ask you for the password again. And so basically what it's doing is hitting all the Ubuntu servers where packages are stored, and it's refreshing the cache on the system. And as you can see, we have 3 packages that can be updated on the system. Now, and so in order to update our packages, there's another command. You basically run sudo apt upgrade. This is how you actually upgrade those packages. So you have to use the upgrade option with the apt package manager in order to upgrade the packages, because right now it didn't do the update. It just told you that you had updates to the actual packages. But in order to upgrade them, you have to type upgrade. And just to point this out right fast, you can actually look at what's being updated by running apt list and then -- upgradable. That'll list out the actual packages that are about to be upgraded before you run the upgrade command. So now let's just go on and run it so you guys can see an update to the system. And then right here, it kind of shows you what packages are being updated. And right now, the Python 3 update manager is being updated. Update manager is being updated, and update manager core is being updated. And then it tells you 3 upgraded applications will be installed, and it also tells you how much additional space will be taken up by these upgrades. So as you can see, that's not much, but let's go down and press enter, or you could type Y for yes, and that's basically confirming that you want to upgrade these packages. And essentially that's pretty much it. That's how you update your system. And now that we've done that, let me go down and show you guys the software center. And this will allow you to install applications. I believe I showed a little bit earlier, but I didn't go through and install anything. So let's go down and install something here so you can see that the sudo command works pretty much the exact same way. So let's install GIMP, which is an image manipulations program. And essentially all you have to do is click on it, and then there's a button that says install. And one cool thing about this package manager right here it has reviews of the packages from everyone that's using it, and information about the actual package that you're installing. And all you have to do is hit install, and this is basically running it as sudo because it has to authenticate. It's the exact same thing as if you were running it within the command line. So let's press authenticate, and then it'll go through the process of installing the package. And at the end of the day, this is doing exactly what you can do within the terminal. And within my first couple years of learning Linux, I forced myself to not use the package manager. I forced myself to install things from the command line. And I recommend you do the same. That way you can get the hang of actually updating, installing packages from the command line, because that's the best way to actually do it. But let's go down and wait for this thing to finish. This is kind of a pretty decent sized program, so it'll take a little while to actually install. But as you can see, it's almost there. It's right at 90%. So let's wait a couple more minutes. But I just wanted to show you guys that that's the full process of installing an application. And that's pretty much it. And if you ever want to remove an application, all you got to do is hit remove. So let's go down and close this. I'm not going to open up the package that I installed. But before we move on, I wanted to show you a couple more things you could do with the app package manager right fast. I figured that would be better for you to understand the actual program. But if we type sudo and then apt, and let's say we want to search for a package, and you got to kind of know the names, but all you have to do is type sudo apt search and then the package name. Let's look for that same package that we just installed. So search GIMP, and it'll search the repository for the GIMP package or the GIMP package that we just installed. Now it doesn't narrow it down too much because a lot of these packages have GIMP in it, but if you scroll through here, you'll see the actual package, and maybe that was a tough one to actually look for. So let's go back down to the bottom and search for something else. And let's press the up arrow and let's search for a zip program. And we all know zip from Windows, how you compress files and folders. You can use the zip package, where there is a ported version of zip on the Linux operating system that you can use to zip and unzip files. So let's go down and search for that and see if it's there. And as you can see, I believe it's zip tool or zip, not zip tool, but it should be, yeah, here we go, zip. It's that is the actual package. So archiver for zip files. So that's a way to search for applications. So let's say we want to install that application. The package name is what's in green, at least on the Linux operating system. And like I said, other distributions use different package managers, so different commands to actually search for packages. But let's say we want to install zip. Let's go down and install it right fast. And the command to install it, and let me move my mouse out of the way, but it's sudo apt install and then zip. And you can press enter and that'll install the zip package. And as you can see, zip is already installed. It already has the latest version. That's why it didn't do anything, because zip is already installed. So let's try unzip, because sometimes unzip is not on here. Let's try that and see if it goes through. Now unzip is on there as well. So anyway, that's pretty much how you install a package. Now let's say you want to remove a package, and one thing we can remove is the unzip package. And all you have to do is type sudo apt, and the command to remove it is simply remove. So remove and then unzip. Or actually, let's remove the GIMP package, and just press enter and it'll go through and remove GIMP. And I believe I might have installed a snap package, so that may not work. So it wasn't installed through apt through the package manager. Sometimes it'll default to the snap version, and I know I didn't explain that, guys, but a snap is essentially a containerized piece of software that you can install. They call it a snap package. It's a new thing that they're pushing to manage packages, but app is still relevant, and it's something you need to learn in order to use the Linux operating system. So let's try removing unzip. right fast, and we can remove that actual application. Should be good to go. So unzip is going to be removed, and then we'll just install it back on the system. But that fully removed unzip from the system. Now let's go on and install it back on the system by just running sudo apt install unzip, so you can see, something actually being installed. And that's pretty much it. So you can use the zip and unzip package on this system. And that's pretty much how you use the package manager on a Linux operating system. And this mainly will work for Debian based distributions. If you're using a different distribution, then you'll have to refer to the package manager's documentation for that distribution of Linux. Okay, so in this segment, I'll cover a couple text editors. And this is very beneficial to understand so you can make changes within the Linux operating system. And I'm talking about like configuration files for various applications within the operating system that you'll occasionally have to do. Like when you install certain applications, for example, an Apache server, then there are configuration files that you have to modify in order to get Apache up and running the proper way. And so it's very beneficial to understand how to use a text editor. So I'm going to show you two of the major ones that I recommend you guys start learning in order to get proficient with editing within the terminal. Because if we look around the desktop, we can easily look around the desktop and there is what they call a text, I forget, it's called text editor. Yeah. And most Linux distributions, if it has a desktop environment, it'll come with a text editor. It could be like mousepad or something like that. And you can easily make changes in here, but it's better to understand how to use it from the command line. So I wanted to cover it right fast so you guys can get a better understanding of it. So first one I wanted to show you guys is Nano. And Nano is the easiest and simplest one to actually use. So let me go down and show you guys how to get started using Nano. And the first thing I want to do is open up the man page for it so you guys can at least see the information about the actual program. And if we check it out, you know what I'm saying, the manual has a lot of good information that can help you understand how to actually use it. Now let's go down and find a file in order for us to edit. So let's go cd, and I know under documents and Ansible, and then I think it's I think we have let's see, a couple files in here we can edit. So lamp simple, let's go into there and press enter, and then let's ls this directory right fast, and let's try that host file right fast. So actually let's cat it out right fast because I want to see how long it is, which it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be too long. Yeah, that's a good enough file size. So let's edit that file. So let me clear right fast, and the easiest way to use Nano is just simply type in Nano and then the actual file name, which was host, and press enter. There we go. So let's just go down to the bottom. I just kind of want to show you guys you could just easily edit this thing simply like this. So let's type Ubuntu, and then let's just type 20.04 LTS. But that's simply how you use the text editor. Now let's cover some of the menu options. Now let's say you needed help while you're actually using this, you could just, with the up arrow right there on each one of these, that's basically the control button. So control G. So let's hit control G, and that'll open up our help. So as you can see, that's the help right there. You can go through it, you know what I'm saying? It kind of explains a little more and explains those commands down at the bottom. Now we can just press Q, and that'll get us back to the actual file itself. But just to cover some more of these options, you got exit right below it. You got control O, which is writing out the changes. So let's, like for instance, let's use that now. We made changes by adding this Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. So we can do control O, and that'll write out our changes to that file name. It's basically going to ask us, are we sure we want to write it to that file and that name? or we could change the format, or we could change the file name if we wanted to like make a copy of it. But let's save it as that file. So that's cool. It says wrote 9 lines, and it basically overwrote that file. And then we have read, so that's control or control W is where is, and that's beneficial if you're, let's say, looking for something in a big long file or a configuration file. That's basically your search. And then the control backslash, that's actually a find replace. Then you got control K. So let's say we want to cut this whole line. All you gotta do is be at the front of the line and hit control K, and that'll cut that actual line. Now let's say we want to paste whatever we just cut. We can just do control U, and that'll paste whatever you had there, or whatever you recently cut. So super cool that that's actually there. Cut paste, you know what I'm saying? Then you got your control J for justified, control T to spell, and then control C cursor precision, and then control underscore go to specific line. And one thing that's beneficial for, let's say you're a programmer or something, a lot of times when you're programming an application or a script or something, it'll throw an error and it'll tell you what line the error is on. So it's beneficial to use that if you're looking for a specific line within the file that was thrown from the error while you was building whatever script or application that you was working on, especially if the file has like 1,000 or something lines, you know, within it. It's very beneficial. Now that's pretty much the high level overview of the Nano text editor. So let's go down and exit out of it, and just to show you how to exit it, you could just hit control and then X, and then we did make some more changes to it. So it's basically asking you if you want to save those changes. So all we have to do is type Y for yes, and then it's going to ask us if we want to write it on to that same file name. Press enter, and that'll actually save out that file, and we can cat it out right fast by typing cat host, press enter, and it'll cat out that file. We can see that those changes have been saved to that file. Now the next text editor I want to show you guys is Vim. Now Vim doesn't come on Ubuntu by default. You have to install it. So all you have to do is type sudo apt install Vim, and that will install it on your operating system. And let's go on and run it again. Even though I already have it installed on here, I just want to run it so you guys can follow along and see how to install the Vim text editor. But Vim is based on VI or V. I believe VI came first, and then Vim, it's just basically VI on steroids. It has a lot of features. You can set key bindings and all kind of stuff using the Vim text editor. And a lot of people rant and rave how great Vim is. But I'm one of these people that like to, I don't know, just get things done. It doesn't matter how it gets done. So a lot of times I'll use Nano, but I do understand how to use Vim, and I see the power in using Vim. So shout out to all you Vim users out there. I definitely like the program. But let's go down and give you a simple usage of the Vim application. And let's clear right fast. And let's go down and open up a file using Vim. So I'm gonna just open up this readme.md file. There we go. And as you can see, the navigation is pretty much the same as Nano, but the problem, or the thing that kind of messes people up when they're first learning, you have to use commands in order to do certain things. Like, for instance, you can't just type right now into the actual program, you know what I'm saying, into the text file. You have to put it in what they call insert mode. And the way you get in the insert mode is just simply by typing I, and then you'll see down at the bottom insert mode. So let's go down and add some changes to here. So let's type Ubuntu 20.04 and then LTS. Boom. So in order to get out of insert mode, all we need to do is just hit exit, and that will take us out of insert mode, and we can go back to just navigating the file or whatever. But now this is basically stored in memory. You know what I'm saying? Whenever you open up an application, you make changes to something, it's kind of stored in memory. It hasn't been written out to the actual file. And that's similar to the Nano text editor as well. Whenever you make changes to the file, it's basically changed in memory, and then until you actually quit the application or save the actual changes, then it's actually just in memory. And there are commands in order to save things in Vim. And so I wanted to show you guys some of them right fast. So in order to, let's say we want to write out those changes that we made, um, in order to do that, all you have to do is hit the escape button and then type colon and then W, and that'll write out the actual changes. So let's press enter. And as you can see, we made those changes. It tells you at the bottom right there, written out. So those changes we made or in the actual file. Now let's verify that we actually saved those changes by let me showing you guys how to quit it. So all you have to do is type colon and then Q and press enter, and I'll actually quit the file. And then let's just cat out that file right fast to read me. That way we can see that those changes are there. And if we look right here, you'll see the Ubuntu 20.04 that we made changes to, the file. Those changes were saved. So let's go down, open it up again in Vim. And let's say we want to make those changes or change. Let's say we want to remove that LTS off the end of it. So let's go insert mode, and then we could delete that text out of there. Now let me show you how to actually quit it. Instead of just writing the changes out, let me show you how to quit it and save it at the same exact time. So all we have to do is type escape, and that'll get us out of insert mode, and then we can just type colon and then write and Q. So W and Q, and that'll write changes and then quit the actual file. So let's press enter, and we can cat it out again just so you guys can see. But if you look up here, the LTS is gone. So that's basically how you make changes to the actual file. You just go into insert mode, and then you can write out those changes, or you can quit and save those changes. And then let's go back into it right fast, and I just want to show you guys how to quit it without making changes. And simply you can go back into insert mode right there, and let's say we want to type LTS, and then let's say this is a very long file and we start going through it and we don't remember what all the changes or the changes that we made within this file. So let's say we don't want to save any changes that we actually made to this file. So all we have to do is type colon, or actually get out of insert mode first, then hit then hit colon and Q, and then bang, or the exclamation point, and press enter, and I'll actually exit out without saving those changes. And we can cat it out again just to make sure, but the changes that we did make, they weren't saved to the actual file. So good to go. Now, like I said, I just wanted to give you guys the basics. I could go like very deep into this actual command or into this actual text editor, as well as Nano. I mean, Nano is, awesome as well. It's pretty basic, but Vim, you can go super far with it. But most people had issues with saving and exiting the actual program. There is a meme that goes around a lot of times with a joke on it, basically saying, how do I exit Vim? You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of funny or whatever. But hopefully this guys get you started with working with text files within the terminal using a text editor. So this concludes my introduction to Linux course. I hope you learned at least the basics of using the Linux operating system, because I think this will motivate you to want to learn more. And throughout my years of working in the IT field, I have always heard people say that learning Linux is too confusing, and I hope this course dispels that myth. So make sure you keep practicing me, because the way to become a guru is to keep using Linux. So I hope you have a good day and keep it techie.
Hello everybody and welcome to my beginner's course for Linux. My name is Herbert and I'll be your instructor. Now a little disclaimer here. If you're looking for a very advanced, very detailed course on Linux system administration, you came at the wrong place, because I'm going to tell you right away, what I'm going to teach you is just dipping your toes in Linux. If you're a beginner, if you want to get to know the operating system a little bit better, if you want to navigate yourself through the console and do things like manipulate files, which is, by the way, one of the most important things that you have to do in Linux, since everything in Linux is a file, you're going to be at the right place. If you just want to dip your toes in Linux, if you are a beginner, if you just want to learn how to navigate yourself through this operating system, you're going to be at the right place. So what we're going to do is we're going to be teaching you how to install Linux. We're going to be showing you how to manipulate files, how to navigate yourself through the file system. We're going to be learning about the Linux file system. We're going to be writing some text. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff, but all very basic. We're not going to go into too much advanced stuff, because that's not my philosophy when it comes to learning. My philosophy when it comes to learning is just teaching you the basics, because I realize that in a real world scenario, you are going to forget 99% of what is said in those 3, 4, 5 hour long courses. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. If you're just a beginner, if you are just somebody who gets to learn Linux, who just needs it for basic tasks, and maybe in a later stage you want to become a system administrator, this course is going to be for you. I have made this course as short as possible. I have made this course as essential as possible. I've packed all the essentials into a short amount of time. I've skipped on all the system administration stuff, on all the server administration stuff, because I've realized that those things come with experience. And I think that the things that you're going to learn in this course are going to be plenty to start your Linux journey. And from there on forward, I would encourage you to start doing projects and stuff like that. But enough talking for now. Let's just dive straight into the course.
Hello, my name is Herbert and welcome to my complete beginner's guide to Linux. In this guide, I will take you from zero to hero, explaining you the most essential Linux concepts that will help you navigate your way through Linux. But first of all, what is Linux anyway? Whether you work in IT or not, you are working with Linux right now. That device you are watching this video on right now uses Linux in some way. But what exactly is Linux and what does it do? First of all, what is an operating system? The very basic definition of an operating system is that it is the layer between your hardware and software. It allows your hardware and software to talk to each other. The operating system does things like manage memory, hard disks, and all of that important stuff. It also makes your mouse cursor move when you are moving your mouse, for example. It can also do much more other things, like host services that can run things like websites. If you have a computer without an operating system, you are pretty much screwed. So, Linux is an operating system? Not really. It's kind of referred to as an operating system, but in actuality, it is a kernel. A kernel is the heart and soul of an operating system that runs the most low-level tasks of the operating system. See, Linux is a term that is used to describe the operating system that uses the Linux kernel. In 1991, a guy from Finland named Linus Torvalds created a kernel that would be a free and open source alternative to the then popular Unix. Linux actually stands for Linux is not Unix. But having just a kernel was not going to get him very far. An operating system needs a whole set of extra features to actually run on a computer or server. This is where Richard Stallman and his team found out about Torvalds' work and asked him kindly if they could use his kernel as an addition to their operating system called GNU, to which he replied, of course, yes. The GNU/Linux operating system was born, but people just refer to it as Linux nowadays. Stallman is still not very happy about this. After all, who wouldn't be? A lot of the tools used in Linux are made by Stallman and his GNU team. Both Torvalds and Stallman were great proponents of a free and open source model. This is the reason why there are so many Linux distributions out there. People could freely download the code and modify it to their desires to create their own projects. What we see now is that most of these Linux distributions share the same free and open source model for their operating system, like for example Debian and Arch Linux, though some are not free as in free of charge. Distributions like Red Hat require paid licenses to get updates and support. But in this course, we are not focusing on Red Hat type distributions. We are going to focus on Debian type distributions, more specific Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of the most popular Linux distributions out there, so it should be no surprise we choose this one for our guide. Other distributions are pretty similar, but they will differ in things such as packet managers and service managers. And we'll get into that, what those are, later in the course. But enough talking for now, let's actually start with the course. So like we said in the previous video, Ubuntu will be the Linux distribution of our choice. So why Ubuntu? Well, Ubuntu is one of the most used operating systems out there in the Linux space. There's others like CentOS and Red Hat, but Ubuntu is by far the most used out there. Also, Microsoft recently implemented something called WSL, which stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux, which uses Ubuntu as its underlying technology. So it should come to no surprise that we're choosing Ubuntu, because this seems to be sort of the industry's standard when it comes to Linux. Now, we're going to be learning about the Ubuntu desktop in this course, but we're not going to be dabbling around with the desktop too much, because we're going to go into the terminal very quickly. We're just going to go over a little bit of setup just to get to know the desktop environment a little bit. But the desktop environment is not really where the power of Linux lies. It's very handy to have such a thing, to be able to navigate yourself in a graphical way through your operating system. But the main focus of Linux is the terminal, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. So let's just download Ubuntu, and let's go over to the website ubuntu.com, and you can click on download, and you can click on Ubuntu desktop, and you can download the 20.04 LTS. If, however, you're watching this video later in the future, you can download whatever the latest version is. But I would suggest you go with the LTS, which stands for long-term support, because this is going to give you the most stability. These are the most tested versions. So we're going to download this one over here. We're now on version 20.04. Again, if you are watching this later in the future, it should be no issue, because most of the commands that I am going to be using are commands that have been around for years, and they are not going to change anytime soon. The next tool that we're going to be downloading is Rufus, and Rufus is actually a tool that makes bootable USB drives. So we're going to be downloading it from rufus.ie, and we're also going to be downloading the latest version, which is 3.13 at the time of this video. But again, if you have a later version, that's fine, just download the later version. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a USB drive that contains the Ubuntu operating system, and this will allow us to install Ubuntu on our PC. Now, fair warning for people installing this with a USB drive: if you are installing this on your hard drive, chances are that you're going to lose all your data. So before you install Ubuntu on your PC, make sure that you have a backup of all your documents. So for installing Ubuntu, there are two options. You can either go, well, actually there's three. You can actually go with a complete installation of Ubuntu, which is the most recommended, which means that everything on your computer is just gone and you only have Ubuntu. You can also go with something called a dual boot installation, and a dual boot will have you boot between, you can choose whenever your computer boots, you can choose between either your main operating system, which is either Ubuntu or Windows, or the other one. So you can choose between Windows and Ubuntu. And if you're on a Mac, you can do the same thing, right? You can use a Mac to boot into the Mac OS, or you can boot into the Ubuntu operating system. And also, if you don't want to do any of this, a third solution is installing VirtualBox. VirtualBox will allow you to install a virtualized environment, which is actually just a computer that runs on top of your computer. So you can actually virtualize a computer, and you can actually run Ubuntu within that computer. Now, do take note that performance is pretty dramatic in a virtual machine like VirtualBox. You'll see that mouse cursors are moving a lot slower. The system itself is pretty slow. So in general, you're not going to get the complete experience of a Ubuntu machine. And even better, if you are ready to take the next step, you can actually just remove every other operating system on your computer and just use Ubuntu. And the reason why I prefer this is because it just gives you this emergency scenario. You have to find solutions to every single thing you encounter. Of course, you are going to find problems with your computer. You're going to find issues with installing software. You're going to find issues with configuring Ubuntu. But this is what learning Linux is all about. It's about getting into trouble and fixing that trouble. That's what, generally learning how to work with an operating system is all about. And that's how I learned it. I just went with a complete empty Linux installation, and I was like, let's just go. Let's just try this. Let's just see where it brings me. And this is where I learned the most, because it really brought me into this scenario where I really had to go and learn more and go and find things on YouTube, go and find things on Google, and go and find things on Stack Overflow. And that's where you really start learning Linux. But again, you have to start somewhere, and this guide will definitely help you on the way to learning the basics of Linux and learning to actually know where to go and look. So now let's actually run Rufus over here. So you can go ahead and run Rufus. You want to allow Rufus to check for applications. We're going to click no because we just downloaded the latest version. Let's insert our USB drive here, and we should see it pop up over here. And now we're going to select the ISO. So you can go ahead and click select. Now let's select the ISO we just downloaded. So we're going to click this one over here. And let's just go ahead and click start. And now we click OK now. And there it has started. And we're just going to let this finish. And once that's finished, we're going to reboot our system, and we're going to insert our USB drive and boot off of the USB drive. Now, of course, booting your computer off of a USB stick is an individual process for each computer. So most likely you're going to go into your BIOS and change the boot order to have the USB stick as the first boot device, and then it should automatically boot into this. And this is actually the language selection menu, so choose whatever language you want, but I would suggest you just go with English. This is going to make it a lot easier to follow along with the tutorial. So we're going to go for English over here, and you can actually try Ubuntu without installing it, but we're actually going to install it right away. We're going to see how Ubuntu looks in just a second when we actually get to the desktop. So we're going to go ahead and install Ubuntu over here. So this should give you a little bit of a glimpse of how Ubuntu actually looks like. So this is sort of the interface you'll get on the desktop. So we're just going to click English. We're going to click continue over here. We're just going to choose our keyboard layout over here, click continue, and we're going to go with the normal installation. So over here you can choose erase disk and install Ubuntu. So there's also going to be an option where you can actually choose to install Ubuntu next to an existing operating system. If you want to experiment with that, go ahead. This should give you the dual boot installation we talked about, but this is just going to be a complete reinstallation, a completely clean installation of Ubuntu, where you only have Ubuntu as your main operating system. Now we're going to type in our name over here. So I'm going to type in my name, and then we can choose a password. Make sure it's a strong password, of course. And now we are actually installing Ubuntu. So the installation is complete. We can click restart now. Be sure to plug out your USB drive when restarting the system. Now I'm going to do a little bit of terminal trickery here, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but it's just because I'm recording this actually, because of technical reasons, I'm recording this video on a virtual machine. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of trickery in the terminal to make this screen a little bit bigger in order so you guys can actually watch this video in full screen. That's why the screen was so small during the setup of this video, just because of technical reasons. I'm recording this on a virtual machine, and when you're installing on a virtual machine, it gets a small screen and you have to make it bigger using some terminal command. Anyways, like I said, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but I'm going to do that right now. So here we are again in our full screen desktop. This time I made the tweak so you guys can follow along on the full screen. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to stop this section. We're going to move on to the next section where we're going to talk about more of desktop tweaks and stuff like that. And after that, we're going to dive straight into the console. So now that we're all set up, we can start configuring Ubuntu to whatever we want it to be. So by default, Ubuntu comes with a few things installed. So we have a web browser, which is Mozilla Firefox by default. We have an email client, which is Thunderbird Mail. We have Rhythmbox, which is a audio player. And then we have LibreOffice Writer, which is actually a word replacer. And then we have the Ubuntu Software Center. Now let's dive into the Ubuntu Software Center for just a second here. So we do have some applications that we can install from this menu. So we can install things like Blender, AlphaCast, but these are of course the things that are our editor's picks. But down here we can actually find other things. So we can find, for example, we can pick news and weather, and here are some news applications. But most likely we don't want to use the software center too much, and the reason for that is because not all the software that's made for Ubuntu is on the software center. So let's just close the software center for now, and let's actually try to download something from the internet. So let's go onto our Mozilla